What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Playbook Sports Podcast. I know you guys are used to seeing mock drafts here and recapping current games and previewing playoff games. We're going to do something a little bit different today. Let's talk about this upcoming free agent class. And I believe I've got 8 players. I'm predicting their contract, the annual per year, the APY, and I've even got some team options for each of them. Let's jump right into this one. We're going to start at the top with QB1 of free agency, truthfully. And that's going to be slinging Sam Darnold, baby. Coming off of an insane season. A season that I truly did not think he was capable of. Honest to God. First game of the year was Minnesota Giants, if I'm not mistaken. And I remember saying, is Sam Darnold better than Daniel Jones? Maybe. I wasn't convinced. And then he goes and lights it up with Kevin O'Connell and the Minnesota Vikings. 2 weeks ago, he was on pace to probably get $50, $55 million a year. He was going to be one of the highest paid quarterbacks because of how well he was playing for Minnesota. And the lights turned on, just a little bit too bright for Sam. And they lose back-to-back, essentially playoff. I mean, you lose the 1 seed to Detroit in that last game where you score 9 points. And you go up against the Rams and you score 9 points and get knocked out of the playoffs pretty easily. And all of a sudden, Minnesota's like, do we have a guy in Sam Darnold? Because they drafted a guy last year in J.J. McCarthy. This is going to be a really tough one for them to pick. I've got 2 teams I want to talk about here. I think Sam Darnold is going to get more than Baker Mayfield. I think Sam Darnold, younger than Baker Mayfield was when he signed his deal, and Sam Darnold's coming off of an incredible season. I think Sam Darnold's contract is going to look about 3 years, $120 million, probably with an out after year 1. I would guess anywhere from $60 to $70 guaranteed dollars, and an out after year 1 where you can spread out some of the dead cap in this contract. So I'm going to say contract prediction, 3 years, 120, averaging about $40 million a year. Obviously, the first team you want to mention with Sam Darnold, in my opinion, is Minnesota. This was his first year with Kevin O'Connell, and he looked this good. That's insane. Their offense was absolutely humming. You know he knows the system because he just ran it, and he just won you 14 games in the regular season. I know he fell apart at the end. I understand that. But 14 wins is 14 wins at the end of the day. That's what it is. You don't know what you have in J.J. McCarthy. You don't know. He couldn't play all year long. Now, maybe you say, well, look at the rest of the rookie class. He can be, like, if he's anything like these other rookies, he's going to be great. Again, you're gambling with that. You have a strong team. You won 14 football games this year. You did all that with Sam Darnold. You don't know what you're going to do with J.J. McCarthy. You don't know what he's going to do on the field. I'm a strong advocate for the Vikings bringing him back. They've got the cap space. They've got about $78 million in cap for 2025. They can definitely pay him $40 million a year for a couple of seasons. What's wrong with sitting J.J. McCarthy another full season of healthy? Like, if he's healthy all year next year as the backup, getting all sorts of practice reps, plenty of time to learn the offense, and then releasing him in a year or 2. Seems to work for the Packers pretty well. The Vikings have to be familiar with that plan. The other team I want to mention here is if he's not going to go back to the Vikings, why not the Las Vegas Raiders? Sitting there picking at pick number 6. Maybe they can get Shedeur Sanders at pick 6. I don't think they'll be able to get Cam Ward. Go watch my mock draft that was just released. They may be able to get Shedeur Sanders though at pick 6, so maybe they go that route. But if you're the Raiders, you look around, you've got talent. Like, there's talent there. You've got a solid offensive line. The issue this year was very clearly the quarterback, and then you trade away Devontae Adams. I know that sucks, and the defense could definitely use help. But you've got approximately right now, before they make any cuts or restructures at all, they've got approximately $100 million in cap space. You can fix up so many things with that. And why not take a run at Sam Darnold? I don't want Sam Darnold back in New York. I think the lights for the Giants were too bright for him. I think he needs, and not saying Vegas isn't crazy bright, but media, talking about the media, it's always focused on the New York media being the hardest one to work with. Vegas media, haven't heard anything about it because we haven't been there that long, truthfully. But you've got $100 million in cap space. You're going to have a new head coach. Maybe it's Ben Johnson, which would be crazy to me if he took that. And you've got arguably the best tight end in football already in Brock Bowers in the year that he just had. And you have the 6th pick in the draft. You could use that on a wide receiver like a Luther Burden, a Tedero McMillan if he's there. You've got options. And if I'm the Raiders, I'm at least picking up the phone and giving him a call. I am going to ultimately predict him to go back to Minnesota, though. I just don't see how Minnesota could let him leave. I don't know how they do that. So we'll say Sam Darnold back to Minnesota, 3 years, $120 million, about 60 to 70 of it guaranteed. Next guy I want to talk about here is wide receiver 1 in free agency, and that is Mr. T. Higgins. Been the number 2 guy in Cincinnati ever since Jamar Chase came to town. He's talented enough to be a 1. He has shown that several times. I think he's going to get. He's not going to be. He's not even going to sniff CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson money, rightfully so. But he's young. He's still a young player. I think he's only 26 years old. He's got his whole prime ahead of him. He's just getting into his prime. I think he's going to get about $25, $26 million a year. I think you can justify that much money, especially when you look around the league and how much these wide receivers are getting paid. I love me some Jalen Waddle. Jalen Waddle's getting mid-20s a year based on his most recent extension, maybe even more money than that. And I think T. Higgins is just as talented as him. I'm going to predict a 4-year, $104 million contract for T. Higgins, so $26 million a year. Yeah, 26 years for this entire season. He's young. I think he can be a true number one. And then you look at what he did for Cincinnati when Jamar Chase was off the field. The 5 games he's played when Jamar did not play since he was there, he's averaging, he's over 500 yards in those 5 games, so over 100 yards a game, and he's got 3 touchdowns in those games. He's shown he can be a number one wide receiver. So who needs a number one wide receiver? Well, I just talked about one of those teams. The Raiders do. They've got plenty of money in cap space. I know you hate to spend $66 million of your $100 million on 2 players when you've got plenty of holes to fix. But there's ways to work around that. Obviously, there's the cap guys they can figure that out. I'm not too worried about that. And when you see 26 a year, 1 year it's 14, another year it's 30. It's all over the place. So don't worry about that so much. But the Raiders need a number one. He's 26 years old. Him and Brock Bowers together, and then whatever you do at pick 6, imagine at pick 6 they go with a Luther Burden. You got Luther Burden to run the intermediate routes, slot routes, along with Brock Bowers, who has proven to be excellent, and then you got T. Higgins too to be your X receiver. Ooh, that's a nice receiving core for Sam Darnold. Who knows? Another team that I think is going to just give him a blank check and say you put the number down that you would like and we're in is the New England Patriots. New England Patriots do not have a wide receiver on roster worth anything. I'm sorry, Patriots fans. I'm sorry, Patriots wide receivers. If you are watching this video, there's nothing there to inspire confidence at all. Jalen Polk, huge bummer this past year. I mean, maybe Pop Douglas in the slot as a little speedster. Sure, I'll give you that one. You need a number one wide receiver. Drake May deserves a number one wide receiver. They have the most cap space in the NFL. There's absolutely no reason they don't at least offer this to him. They need to at least offer him this much money. They tried to get Brandon Ayuk. Ayuk said no thank you. T. Higgins, Drake May looks pretty good, man. He looked pretty solid. He flashed a lot. I loved Drake May in the process last year during the draft. I think T. Higgins is going to take the money, and I think he's going to end up in New England. So sorry, Raiders, you swing and miss twice here. But I am going to predict T. Higgins to New England, 4 years, $104 million, probably closer to $80 million of that guaranteed, just to sweeten the deal and really make sure that they get him. I think you have to get a number one receiver this offseason, and he's the best one. Chris Godwin's good, and we'll talk about him in another video, I'm certain, but he's older, and I like the upside with T. Higgins. Next, guys, let's talk about some offensive linemen. First one, I'll be brief here. I got Ronnie Stanley here as a free agent left tackle. He's going back to Baltimore. Baltimore is not going to let him leave. They can't. They can't afford to let him go. They don't have a left tackle on roster to replace him. He's not old by any means. I think he would be more than willing to do a 2-year deal. I think he's 31 years old. 2-year deal, give him about $45 million. $22.5 million a year on average. Do some void years at the end of this contract to kind of push off some of that money so that way you can really maximize your roster right now. I just don't see any way Ronnie Stanley's not a Baltimore Raven next year. Probably in the $21 to $23 million range a year. Next up, let's talk Jedrick Wills. I think he's on the move. Obviously, I don't think Cleveland's going to keep him around. They don't have the cap. He hasn't really caught on there, man. As a top 15, top 20 guy in his draft class. He's got all of the physical tools to be a really good left tackle. It just hasn't worked so far in Cleveland. And get out of Cleveland and watch what happens. All of a sudden, you're great. Baker Mayfield. It just tends to happen. Maybe find a new offensive line coach, and he can unlock something in him. I think Jedrick Wills will be getting about $10 million a year. So my predicted contract for him, since he's young, I'm saying 3 years, $30 million, probably 24 of it guaranteed. So most of the contract guaranteed. A team I'd like to get him is the Indianapolis Colts. I think the Colts have a culture of really good offensive linemen. They've had several throughout just the last 10, 15 years of a really good offensive line. They've got $40 million in space as of today. Obviously, that will go up in the very near future. And they just don't have a left tackle to write home about. I mean, Raymond? No. I think you take a chance on a guy in his mid-20s, like 25, 26 years old, who was a first-round pick for a reason. He's got all of the upside at this position. He could be your left tackle for the next 8-9 years, and you can get him cheap for the next 3 seasons. I think the Colts should do that. Get another blocker. I think everything that the Colts do this offseason needs to be about determining whether or not Anthony Richardson's the guy. And if he's running for his life every play, which he can do, but if he's running for his life every single play, you'll never know what he can do as a passer. So get him a good left tackle and then address other things in the draft. Again, go watch the mock draft video if you want to know who I have them taken. Biggest offensive lineman in this class. I think the guy who's the most expensive for sure is Trey Smith out of Kansas City. One of, if not the best, right guards in football. He has been awesome for Kansas City ever since they drafted him out of Tennessee. And I think we have a very easy comp. Robert Hunt last year got 5 years, $100 million from Carolina. That's got to be the starting point. Like, hey, I'm as good, better than Robert Hunt is, who I love. Love me some Robert Hunt. And I need to outdo that. I don't think he needs to blow it out of the water. I don't think the team that signs him needs to say, okay, he got 20, let's go 25. I think that's insane. I think $21 million a year for 5 years. He's young as well. Another young guy. I'm mainly touching on the younger free agents in this class. I think 5 years, $105 million. So you go over Robert Hunt by $1 million a year. Nothing too crazy for them. And I think that the team that absolutely has to sign him. This is one of those rare, they have to sign this guy. Chicago Bears, man. The Bears need to call him up and basically, again, similarly to the T. Higgins thing, they need to say, how much money do you want? That's what we'll pay you. We're in. We need you. The Bears' interior offensive line was pathetic all season. And if the Bears all of a sudden get Trey Smith at right guard, that elevates the entire unit. All of a sudden, Darnold Wright is not trying to cover for subpar right guard play. He's not trying to do 2 jobs at once. And then if they draft offensive linemen as well, now you've got 4 starters that you can count on. And then you figure out the center position at some point. But I think the Bears have to bring him in. This is a must sign for the Chicago Bears if Kansas City lets him walk out of that building, which I'm assuming that they do because their cap space is getting tight. They can't pay everybody. I think if he's available, the Chicago Bears have to get him. This is a must-have. Next up, let's talk edge rusher here. I'm going to talk about Josh Sweat from Philadelphia as we switch over to the defensive side of the ball. I've got 3 guys I want to talk about here, starting with Josh Sweat. 3 years, $42 million is what I project him to get, so about $14 million a year. Could see a team pay up to $15 million a year. I think that this isn't a must-get, but a team and the New England Patriots needs to be willing to pay this. They have to be willing to pay this because their highest paid edge rusher right now is Keon White, 2nd-round pick. They're paying him $2.1 million next year. That cannot be your highest paid edge rusher, not if you want to be successful. They got rid of Matthew Judon last year. They just don't have anybody to rush the passer at all. Josh Sweat, very, very solid, very consistent, pretty much a guaranteed minimum 8 sacks a season guy, and he's not going to miss many games either. I don't think he's missed a game that he wasn't just held out of. I don't think he missed a game for injury in 6 seasons. The guy's always on the field. He's got double-digit sack upside. The Patriots don't have anybody to rush the passer. They've got to get someone in the building. Josh Sweat, 27 years old, I believe. I think he'd be a good one for Keon White to learn from. And if they draft a pass rusher at pick 4, which is definitely on the cards or on the table for them, I think Joshua would be a good one for them to learn from. Briefly, I do want to discuss Dray Greenlaw. He's not getting out of San Francisco. Middle linebacker for them. I mean, him and Fred Warner formed the best middle linebacker duo in the entire NFL, especially not this season, but the season before this. Going into the Super Bowl, it was all the talk. They're the best duo. Dray Greenlaw's sideline-to-sideline speed is second to maybe only Fred Warner at the linebacker position. He's tough. He is a hard-hitting guy. I think any team would love to have him. He's not old either. He's still young as well. However, he is coming off of, he tore his Achilles tendon in the Super Bowl, came back this year to play for a little bit, didn't look like himself, still looked hurt. He rushed back from this to try and help save the 49ers season. I hope he didn't hurt himself any further, but a full year removed going into next season, a full year and a half removed from that injury. I think Dray Greenlaw signs a 1-year deal with the 49ers. 1 year, I think they give him not top linebacker money, but I think he deserves what a guy like Patrick Queen got. I think he deserves about $15 million a year for 1 year. That's what I would be offering him. We can do this for a year, maybe a void year at, split it up however you have to juggle the cap space, right? I don't see any way they let him walk, especially when their championship window is starting to maybe close a little bit as their defenders age. Keep Dray Greenlaw in the building next year, and your defense will be right back in that top 5 conversation. Last but not least, let's hurt my feelings a little bit. Let's talk about safety Javon Holland. I do think coming into last year, coming into this season, he was a guy that was like, oh, he's $20 million a year player. He's a $20 million a year safety. He's Antoine Winfield caliber guy. And he was not very good this year. Just having watched him miss tackle after tackle after tackle, not very great this year. Tough to have a bad season in a contract year, but that's what happened. That being said, I don't think that drops his overall value a ton because he's only 25 years old. He's shown he can be a really good safety. I think ultimately he gets about a 4-year, $72 million contract. Works out to about $18 million a year. I think that's totally reasonable for Javon Holland, who, once again, down season this year, but we've seen what he can do. And where he goes, I think, is very obvious to me. I think this one is a slam dunk. I think he goes and joins his old coach in Minnesota. I'm assuming at this point that Brian Flores does not get a head coaching job and he stays in Minnesota as a defensive coordinator. Javon Holland never looked as good as he did his rookie year under Brian Flores. That was the very best Javon Holland we have seen, and he looked like a top 5 safety in the NFL at the end of that season. The dude was all over the place, laying huge hits in games. I mean, just with reckless abandonment of his own body, just didn't care. He was going to make a play for the defense, and it was awesome to watch, and I loved that version of Javon Holland. And then it just seems like he got a little soft, where he didn't want to get his hand in the dirt, didn't want to get messy, didn't want to lay the boom anymore. I think you sent him out to his old coach. I think Flores can get the very best out of him. Again, I say this every time I talk about him. Brian Flores, amazing defensive coordinator, terrible head coach, terrible person. I think Brian Flores, with his knowledge of him, I still think Javon Holland has something in him. I don't think he's elite, but I think he's a very, very good safety. And then you look at Minnesota, they've got the cap space to do this, and then their starting safety, their best safety is Harrison Smith, and he is 36 years old. He cannot play forever, and then there's nothing to speak of after him. They've got to make a move. I think Javon Holland would be a great fit out there in Minnesota. Obviously, he fits that Brian Flores defense perfectly. That's all I've got for you guys on today's free agent video. There will be several more of these. I only touched on a handful of players. There is a ton of available talent in free agency this year, especially like the wide receiver position. If you need a running back or really quarterback, look away because it's not pretty, but everywhere else there is some talent to be had. A lot of good players on the offensive lines, a lot of good secondary members. So we will have plenty more videos coming out for you guys about free agency. And if you are a fan of the NFL draft, this is the channel to be. So make sure you guys hit that red subscribe button right there on your screen. It takes 2 seconds to click it. Make sure you guys like the video if you like this kind of content. We'll see you all in the next one.